Yeah, we're recording now. And I'm gonna close this. Well, no, I'll just share the screen first. Okay, great. And so everybody can see now, oops, the slides. Oops. Okay, now I'm rushing ahead here. Okay. Perfect. So this is what are you growing this year? That's the workshop title for today. The title on Facebook and where we advertise was what you're growing this year. But I am not Peyton and he made the title and I decided that I would just say it the way I would normally say it. So that's where this looks a little different on the title slide. But yeah, we're going to talk about crop planning and plant choosing and just how to get ready for planting and growing your garden this spring. If you see me looking over to the left, it's because I have my notes over here. So that's what I'm going to lean on a little bit today. But that's just so you know what I'm up to. And so some housekeeping for this workshop. As we've said in different workshops, if we have people who are calling in who can't see the slides, you can let me know and I can share those with you later by email or in another form that would work for you. Watch the chat box and just like uplift people's voices if you feel like someone had a question and I didn't see it. And we have limited time, so just remember, we say with our teen crew, like one Devo, one mic. So remember to pass the mic to folks who haven't had time to ask a question or make comments yet. And you can just try using the hand raise function if you have a question or commenting in the chat to add input. And it says type stack in the chat if you'd like to say something next, but it might just work. There's not very many of us, so it might work well to just raise your hand. And one of the important things today, I'm not physically at Growing Hope right now, but I'm right around the corner. And it's we like to start all of our workshops and all of our volunteer days by acknowledging the land that we cultivate, that this is unceded territory stolen from the people of the three fires of the Anishinaabe, the Potawatomi, the Odawa, and the Ojibwe people. And we honor the thousands of years that they've managed, farmed and cared for this land, and also the stewardship before them of different tribes like the Wyandot and the Fox and the Huron. We hope that we'll find more ways to honor them in the future and support a truth and reconciliation process that includes like real return of land and land use management. So as you might have guessed, I'm with Growing Hope, and that's why I'm doing this workshop. So I'm Charlotte. I'm the farm manager at Growing Hope, and Growing Hope is a 501c3 nonprofit that you might have heard of. That's in Ypsilanti. I have put our mission and our vision up here on the screen, but it's basically an organization that's trying to work for a better food system for everyone. And I like the vision statement the most, where we're envisioning a community where people are able to participate in the food system fully and have basically sovereignty over their own food and how it's grown and what they're able to do with it. So, oops. Yeah. But Growing Hope does a lot of things to work towards these goals and visions. And one of them is running the urban farm where I work as the manager, but we also have a program called the Home Vegetable Garden Program. And that actually we just put out those applications this week. And the Home Vegetable Garden Program is a really cool program for working class Ypsi residents where you can get a garden bed built at your home. And so I put the flyer that we have up in here, but then there's also a link to apply for that program. And we're also looking for mentors for that program. So that's both of those links for those applications are up in on the screen. And then for more information, you can also just shoot me an email. My email is there as well. So that's one thing that's going on lately. The other thing is we're looking for teen applicants for our teen program. And that's a full year program. During the summer. It's more hours. They work usually Monday through Thursday for 20 hours a week. And then the after school program is 3 days, 2 hours each day. But the teens are paid $13 an hour this year, and it's a really, really awesome program. And I put the application link for that in there as well, if you know any young people who are interested in getting involved with Growing Hope. And also the email for our teen program leader, who is Cassandra at growinghope.net. Let's see. I also wanted to mention that the workshop series is continuing, even though the virtual part will be over after this one. The first in-person workshop is next weekend at 1 p.m. So that's April 2nd at 1, and it's going to be so I think that's most of my announcements here. So we're going to kind of go around the Zoom room if you are comfortable and introduce yourself. You can say your name, your pronouns, and kind of what brought you to this workshop today. Like, what are you excited to grow this year? What's something you want to learn, or something that interests you about garden and crop planning? And if you don't feel like talking, you don't have to. But oh yeah, Julia wants to go.
I can go. I moved to Ypsilanti a couple years ago, but I lived here before when I was in grad school. And a long time, not that long ago, I'm not that old, but a while ago, I was in AmeriCorps Vista in Lansing, and I did gardening programs and farmers markets and greenhouse work. And so I was like really excited. I think I had a plot with Growing Hope when I was in graduate school. Excited to learn kind of more about like what Growing Hope is doing and what's going on and ways that I can be involved. And also I just like to talk about gardening. And I put in, when I moved out here, I put in some 4x4 raised beds in my yard that I do for veggie gardening. And then I have a bunch of perennial gardens around the house as well. So I'm pretty excited for this year.
Cool, thanks, Julia. Looks like Michelle wants to go next.
Yeah, I'm Michelle, she, her, and I used to live, I think, steps away from the Growing Hope house on Ferris Street in Ypsi. I since moved next door to the city of Wayne, but still interested in what Growing Hope does and maybe getting involved at some point. And also I'm on my second year of gardening at this new house. It was really exciting last year to be able to feed myself. I did really well with growing like spinach and spaghetti squash and other things. And just as, you know, geopolitical conversations about climate crisis and food shortages and like the safety of food are coming up, it's something that I'm feeling more and more passionate about in terms of, you know, keeping food local, growing your own, and empowering other people to grow theirs. So I'm just a very eager student in the very beginning of learning about all of this and doing all of this.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name is Scott, he, him. We actually live down south of Ypsilanti, down in Dundee. We've lived here about 25 years. And my wife and I have been a little bit getting involved in the Ypsilanti area. Our 3 kids now live there. My wife is involved with Peace House, and we're looking to expand our garden. We've always had a garden. We live on about an acre of land down here. We've always had a garden, a small one. But we're looking to expand it and hopefully be able to share our produce with Peace House and other places. And I'd like to get also involved with Growing Hope and see what I can help there. But just looking forward to learning more about gardening.
Great, thank you, Scott. Would anybody else like to share a little bit about themselves or their gardening interests? That's okay. We can move on. If you feel so inclined later, please jump in. Also, if you have questions during this workshop, and even if it's kind of in the middle of something I'm talking about, please feel free to ask a question. It can either be in the chat, not going to see that, you can just like talk. It seems like this group is pretty quiet, so it probably won't be a problem for you to just talk a little bit. So let's jump in. The last workshop that we had was talking about where you're growing, and it touched on like what spacing you have in your yard, like how much sunlight you have, and what kinds of like containers or ground you might have to grow in. Because where you're growing really determines like what you're going to grow in a lot of ways. You can see in this slide, there's like container gardens kind of in the center where they're using like big pots and stuff to just grow plants in that. And those are usually better for smaller plants like herbs and flowers. And if you have a really big pot, they can be good for like peppers and tomatoes also, but it has to be like pretty sizable. And container gardening also is good if you're growing like inside your house or on a balcony because you don't have yard space. So those kind of things will shape what you're going to grow. And then if you have like a really big yard, like in the top left, and you're growing in the ground, you usually have a lot more options. Also with like raised beds, like on the right, a lot more space and a lot more options to try different things. So let's see. So yeah, planning your garden. The first like question that comes up with crop planning is like, what are you going to grow? And I guess I was supposed to say like, it's difficult to like focus on a garden long term if you don't have like a kind of a plan or a goal, and it can be easy to kind of get sidetracked or like forget about what's back in the backyard, or even like plants that are in pots in your front yard. You can forget about if there's no like real reason you're growing them or like a plan for what you want to do with the food. So that's also like a great reason to crop plan. And so crop plans answer the question, what to grow, when to grow, and how to grow it. So we're starting with what to grow. And what to plant is going to obviously be shaped by what you want to grow or eat or make. These examples on the slide are like an herb garden for like culinary herbs in your kitchen, a salsa garden for making fresh salsa or canning salsa in the fall, and a salad garden for like having fresh salad all summer long. Oh yeah, sorry, I keep looking at my notes and being like, what? Other like examples of different themed gardens that are really fun to have are things like a pickling garden or gardens with specific vegetables that you're going to use for canning, or for like other fun food projects like pizza and that kind of thing. So themed gardens can be great. Other things that will shape what to grow are some of those things we were talking about before, how much sun there is in your space. Usually if you're inside, you need south-facing windows with at least like 6 to 8 hours of sun. And it's kind of the same thing outside. If you're growing on the north side of your house, it can be very shaded and it can be hard to grow things like tomatoes and peppers that require a lot more sunlight. And it's easier to grow smaller things that grow better in shade, like lettuce or perennial herbs like oregano and thyme and things like that. There's another thing that people often don't think very much about, which is like, when do you have the time to work in your garden? And it's just such a tricky one, right? It's like, do you think you're going to have enough time to maintain like a really big garden, or would it be better to maybe start with containers or like a really small like raised bed in your front lawn, because you know like the only time you have to take care of it is after work, and you're working 8 to 5 days a week, and on the weekend you're kind of pooped and you're not going to be able to take care of it. Or maybe like you have a spouse or a friend who's really interested in gardening and who's going to help you with it. Those things all kind of play into like how intense you're going to be with what you grow. So when to grow, this one's can get a little tricky, but basically you want to wait to plant in the spring until soil and air temperatures are good for the plants that you are planning to grow. And this will vary. Obviously, there are warm season crops and cold season crops. Usually this information is things that you can get from a seed packet or a seed catalog or online. Warm season crops have to be planted after the last frost date. This map that I have on the slide here, actually, can I ask you guys a question? Can you see the right-hand side of the slide, or is the Zoom window blocking it for you?
Where it says median dates and has the key.
Okay, cool. It sounds like you can see it. I
Yeah.
have my tiny little Zoom windows blocking it, but I know. So yeah, it's like median last frost date in the spring. And in the map, basically it's showing like when's the last day that it's gonna theoretically end around the time when it's going to not be freezing, below freezing anymore overnight in your area, or during the day, I guess too. But I mean, right now we're heading into another like week where we'll have every evening will be below freezing. So that's right now is not a good time to plant your warm season crops outside. On this map, you can see like in Southeast Michigan, we're around May 1st. That's like when our last frost date is. It's usually, people say, but it's usually in early May. I've seen some predictions in particular with warming weather that it's getting earlier and earlier. And you'll also notice there's a little scrap of like late April around the Detroit area on the map where we get kind of a heat island from the city there, and it ends up just making that area like a slightly warmer growing zone. The other things besides frost dates that you want to think about, oh, I was going to say cool season crops can be planted earlier, depending on the temperatures. You can also like check your seed packet for that. So like warm season crops are going to be your like squash in particular. Squash and cucumbers are very sensitive to cold. So they need to be planted after the last frost date. But things like peas, cilantro, spinach, and lettuce can be planted sometimes before the last frost date, as long as like the daytime temperatures are pretty warm and you might be able to cover them or protect them if you know you're going to get a really cold night. That's always an important factor. And then day length. That's another thing about when you're going to grow. So day length is already pretty long in April and May when a lot of planting occurs. So that's fine for many plants. But some plants respond like more to the heat of the summer than to day length. And some like spinach, lettuce, beets, carrots, and turnips will eventually flower when they're exposed to days that are longer than 12 hours. So these plants are better to plant early in the spring or like later in the fall. So you can avoid like them growing during the longest part of the summer and bolting, which is like going to flower directly. So we eat the leaves and roots of these plants, which is why we don't want them to flower. Other plants that we eat the fruit of, we do want them to flower, right? Like cucumbers and tomatoes. So that's one kind of plant physiology tricky thing about growing, is like figuring out what plants will like the long day length the best. Let's see. Oh yeah, I talked about if you put things in before the last frost date, you'll want to be able to protect them from frost.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it always the case that, so for example, I have radishes that have sprouted. I understand that they do well in cold. They're very cold resistant. Is it always the case that, you know, if you have seedlings like that before the last frost date and you get cold weather like what we're going to get, they need to be covered up with something?
I would, just because they haven't experienced that kind of cold very much. If they've grown over the whole winter, I would probably even cover them, because on Sunday night, we're going to get like 15 degrees.
Yeah,
which is very cold. If it's like right at 32, sometimes they don't really need to be covered. But I often cover things just because you never quite know what the forecast is, whether it's going to be accurate or whether it's going to be a few degrees lower.
Got it.
But with those radishes, I would probably cover them on the next couple nights we're going to have, because it's going to be significantly below freezing.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. And you can cover them with anything. I have a slide about this later, but like people, you can just like put out like a couple of boxes at the end of each row or the end of the bed and then like throw a blanket over it. And that like works fine as long as you take it off during the day when it's warmer.
I absolutely did that last year. I'm a big fan of using what you already have around the house.
Yeah. And if you have just like one plant out there, you can literally just take like a plastic bottle and like put it over top of it. I've seen people do that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just some protection from the cold air like descending on it and giving it a little bubble to stay warmer. So let's see. So that's what, I guess that's what I was talking about with season extension and plant protection. And I have a couple of, oh, I'll put those in the chat later. I have a couple of like planting guides for the Ypsilanti area and for the Michigan area where it kind of like tells you a little bit about like what kinds of things you should be planting at what times. And those are really helpful as like references to check back in on and like look at like what a typical growing calendar would look like for Ypsilanti. So I'll share those at the end of this session also. Right now I'm like just trying to remember how to use Zoom so that I can do this properly. Okay, so planting your garden, the next step is like how to grow it. Because you've got your plan, you know, like what you're going to grow and kind of when you're going to plant it. And so then you're like, okay, how am I gonna plant these plants? What's my spacing? What do I need to do with that? And so plants with a large canopy and like deep roots will need more space than plants with a little canopy and shallow roots, which makes sense to everyone, but sometimes it's hard to tell like what is what with that. A tomato plant usually needs like 2 square feet of space, which sometimes people are surprised about. Like that's a pretty big amount of space, but they usually just end up growing huge and spreading everywhere and need all that space to spread out. And in particular, if you haven't like trellised them up very far, they'll end up like spreading their limbs way out and about. But a lettuce plant only needs like 4 to 6 inches square of space to grow in. Other plants that tend to take up a lot of space are things like broccoli and cauliflower. Those get really big and they really like to have deep, their roots to go really deep. So they're good things to plant in the ground if you have that kind of space, or if you have a really big container, they're good to plant in there. Squash and cucumbers, as you know, if you don't trellis them upwards, like if you don't build something that they can climb, they will just like spread everywhere and be enormous. And kind of the same with zucchini. Zucchini doesn't climb, but it gets huge. And so those plants, you need to kind of bank more space for them. One way to work around that a little bit and to save space is to do intercropping, which is shown in this like picture in the lower left. In this picture, I think it's broccoli and lettuce that are growing next to each other, where you can kind of like maximize your space by growing like a big plant next to a plant that has complementary needs. It has like shorter roots, it doesn't need as much sunlight. And then there's the bigger plant that needs more sun and has deeper roots. And there's other ways to look at intercropping. There's a lot of like companion planting things that you can talk about with that, where there are certain plants that are good to grow together. People say like peas and carrots and things like that. But I usually just go with plants that I know are not in the same family and have like kind of different like space needs that they can grow together. Another thing to think about with gardens is succession planting. And that is when you plan for like a continuous harvest, because some things grow really fast and then are done. Like those radishes you were just talking about are going to be done in like 45 days. They're going to, before summer even, they're probably going to be ready to harvest and be gone. And so then you have to plan what you're going to plant next. And in particular with things like a salad garden, because lettuce also grows really quickly. And then when you cut it a few times, it might like start to not be so good anymore. And then you kind of have to take it out and like replant. And so the succession plan is like planning so that you know when you want to have your next seeds going in the ground or your next seeds like getting started so that they're ready to put in your garden. So crop rotation is another aspect of this kind of garden planning. especially if you've been growing for more than a couple of years in your garden. Did you, like, if you grew certain plants in one part of the garden last year, planting something different in that space this year helps prevent pests and diseases. And it also doesn't deplete like the same soil nutrients over and over again. In particular, if you're not adding that much into your garden, you're just putting in some compost, it's good to like switch up what kinds of plants you're growing in that space. The best rule of thumb that I've used is to grow plants from a different family every year in a different space. The diagram that's on this slide has a suggested rotation of plant families, but what I find to be useful is just finding out what plant families your previous plants were and then putting something different in there. Most plants are fine following one another as long as they're like in a different botanical family. And this sounds really complicated, but you can usually find this very easily on the internet. You're like, what family is the onion in? And you'll find out that it's like an allium, like garlic and chives and all those fun, zesty plants. So that's the way I usually do it, even just on the farm with all that space. I like plan to put different things after each other. And so an example of this that's like a little bit simpler is like if you have a big planter in your yard and last year you had tomatoes in there. Tomatoes are in the nightshade or Solanaceae family. And if you want to plant a crop from a different family there, you could choose something like pumpkins or zucchini from the cucurbit or squash family, or a brassica like broccoli or cauliflower, or a lettuce like, yeah, lettuce, it says sunflower family. They're usually, it's Asteraceae, but peppers or eggplant would not be a good choice to plant after tomatoes because they're actually in the same family as tomatoes. Yeah, so this is a lot of information, but the long and short of it is how we put all this information together to like plan our garden and make a crop plan, which is a document that tells you what you're going to plant, when you're going to plant it, and where you're going to plant it. And this can be looked at like a few different ways, or probably even more than the number of ways that I've listed, but I've showed a few of them here so you can kind of see like what planning looks like in different people's heads. And this is like a picture or a spatial representation that's pretty ugly because I made it myself. People do really beautiful hand-drawn things of their gardens to like see where they're going to plant things. These are an imagined raised beds of someone who is planting themselves a pizza garden. And you can see on here, it's like showing like where they're going to situate each plant. It has like what plants are going there and then the date that they're going to plant them. And so they kind of have this whole thing planned out. And on the lower left with the spinach, you can see that they have like a succession plan for their spinach, right? Because that's one of the things that grows quickly and then will be harvested. And they're like, I'm going to plant some in April, some in June, and some in August. And like maybe those dates will change a little bit as they see how the season goes. But there's the plan that you're going to need all like more spinach seeds to like reseed your crop. This also is, the spatial representation is helpful for like if you have different sizes of plants and you want to know whether they'll fit in the space together. It's a nice way of looking at it and being like, gosh, in these big planters on the right, I really can only have like one tomato plant. But then in the bigger beds, I can have more plants. So that's a cool way to look at it. There's also the just like straight up list, which is helpful for people who like to cross things off and don't necessarily need to see it all. It's just in their head and doesn't have to be on paper. And so this list is again, just like for my pickling garden, these are the things I'm planting, how many I'm planting or like how much I'm planting, and then with a date. So like, and this in this example, well, at least for the first part, oh no, I didn't actually put it in chronological order, but it's almost in chronological order because the onions are going in first and then the dill and then the other more warm season plants. Let's see. And then if you are a very highly organized person, or if you have, or if you have a really big garden, and this is the way I plan my garden because, well, this is the way I plan at the farm, just because there's so much and I want to have a way to organize like a lot of information for myself. You can make a spreadsheet and you can have the date that you're planning to plant things out, the crops you're going to plant, like what kind of garden you're having. So you can see that I have a salad garden planned, a salsa garden planned, and an edible flower garden planned in like the bed area column. Whether you're direct seeding, which is like putting the seeds into the ground directly, or transplanting, where you started them inside and then are taking them outside as seedlings. And then I have the sizes of the beds in here as well, just so that I know, like, I can make a calculation of how many seeds I need. Because if I have a 6 foot by 3 foot bed and I want, 2 rows of radish with certain spacing, I can then like do the math in the spreadsheet, which is really easy. You can put a function in there and know that I need like 65 seeds for my radish rows. This is very detailed and not everyone needs this kind of planning. Sometimes you're just like, it's okay, I have like 2 packets of radish seed, it'll be fine. And I think that this is just kind of like a cool way to do it if you like are nerding out on planting plans. It's also a fun way to track like when you actually planted things and then when you harvested them, so you know better next year like when you're going to get your harvest, even though there are predicted harvest dates usually for plants on like a seed packet. Sometimes it's nice to know, like in my garden, it actually takes like 100 days for tomatoes to make a fruit instead of 90 days. So that's crop planning, starting out. And then there's another aspect to this, right? Though, because like you can have your plans, but then what about like getting transplants? Because some plants take a really long time to grow, and you can direct seed a lot of things. Like on here we have radish, peas, cilantro, some flowers, things like that can go directly into the ground. In particular, when it's warmer out, you direct seed and then things start growing. And if there's too many of them, you can thin them. But some plants just take a really long time to grow. Like if you plant a tomato seed outside in May when it's finally warm enough, that may not be ready to harvest until like late August or September. But what if you want your tomatoes in July, right? Like what if you want your crops earlier? In that case, you're going to have to buy or grow transplants for yourself. And that's kind of a whole nother aspect of planning. So when you're planning for transplants, you have a couple options, right? You can do your own. And if you do that, you need either really sunny south-facing windows in a nice toasty house, or grow lights that you set up on either a shelf or like a rack, and you need space for that so that the plants can grow under the lights somewhere in your house. You need potting soil, obviously, and like trays or small pots with drainage to start them. One thing about growing plants in front of the window, which I've done myself at home a lot, is that they often stretch towards the light. You can see the plants in this picture doing that. And a good way to help them not stretch so much is to keep turning the tray like every day so that a different side of the plant is facing the light, because they just know where the light is. They have a hormone that shows them which way to grow, and they start growing like that. And then if you turn the tray around, they'll like switch direction and start growing the other way, and it can help them not be as weird shaped when they're older if you turn them so that the light is more even. If you don't have space and you don't have light, that is a good time to either find a friend who can help you grow transplants, which can be really awesome if you team up with a friend for gardening in general. It helps build morale, and like you guys can do a food project together with the stuff you grow. But there's also a lot of places to get good seedlings in the Ypsi, Ann Arbor area. You can always buy seedlings directly from farmers or at farmers markets. There's a lot of great seedlings, both at the Ypsi Farmers Market and at the Ann Arbor Farmers Market in the spring. And then there's also garden stores. I mean, there's a ton of different like hardware stores and stuff in our area that sell seedlings. If you want to get things more locally that are better prepared for the Michigan climate, it's always good to buy from local farmers, but you can also go to Lowe's or Home Depot and find pretty good seedlings there. And then there's also great sources for free seedlings. Every spring, we at Growing Hope grow a lot of seedlings, both for the home vegetable garden program and for the community. So we have different seedling distributions where we have just like seedlings for free, which is a fun way to get things. You might not get exactly what you were hoping for, which is why it's always, if you want exactly what you want, you might have to buy them. But if you're willing to like take a chance on an unusual plant or like a different variety than you usually grow, getting free ones is fun. I think our first seedling distribution is in the evening, but we'll advertise that online and on our website when we actually have the dates out. So let's see. So more planning for transplants, if you're going to do them yourself, this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about how you get your head around the timing and yeah, getting that whole process in motion. Let's see. So when should you start them? Basically, you can look at a seed packet or check out the variety of seed that you have online and see. They'll usually say how many weeks before the last frost date to start the plants. And this example is a seed packet of basil seedlings. And it says when to sow outside 1 to 2 weeks before the last frost. After the last frost date. But you can also start basil inside and it will tell you like how long before that you need to do that. One example that I had, it was like starting tomatoes. So it'll say start tomatoes 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost, and then plant outside 2 weeks after the last frost date. And so in our area, the last frost is between like May 1st and May 10th. And so if we use May 10th, we can count backwards on our calendar. I think I have a calendar picture here. Oh yeah, if we use May 10th, we can count backwards on our calendar 6 weeks before, and that's March 29th. Or if you want to go 8 weeks before, it would be like March 15th. And that would be the day that you were like in your house with your potting soil, starting your seeds and putting them under the lights. But then you would wait until 2 weeks after the last frost to plant out. And so you would wait until May 24th to put those seedlings outside. So they'd be growing in your house for a pretty long time, which is something that people don't always like remember when they're like, when do I start the seedlings? And you have to start some things like really early in order to get them ready for going outside. Let me go back to that other slide. With amount of seeds, I'm going to actually talk about this at the next in-person seed starting workshop, but usually you want like 1.5 to 2 times the amount of seeds for the seedlings that you want. So like if you want like 5 tomato plants, you'll probably want at least 10 seeds or maybe more to start those. And like usually putting 2 seeds in each cell or pot is good, just in case one is a dud and doesn't grow, the other one might grow. So that's your backup plan for that. Oh yeah, and then the when to plant outside is just, again, checking the seed packet or the internet and waiting for that last frost date and like kind of watching the weather too. Because sometimes it's like the last frost date is May 1st. And then May 1st, it's like snowing and you have to just think about, well, maybe I should wait a little longer if the weather isn't looking good. Yeah, so then, yeah, you just, once you've started your seeds, you just have to keep them hydrated and lit well, and then wait until you have that optimal weather for planting them. That was calendar. And then you can do a similar complicated spreadsheet to plan and document like when you want to plant your seeds, or sorry, when you want to start your seeds for transplants. I just put this on here. This is also the way that I like to plan my transplants. But this is for all those planning geeks out there to see like, oh, this is a way, like if I wanted to know exactly when I'm starting everything and like how many seeds I'm starting, this is one way to do that. You put in the dates that you need to start the seeds, and then how many seeds you want to start, or sorry, how many plants that you want to have at the end, right? That's important. And then the dates that you're planning to plant them outside, and then you organize from there so you know when you're starting, basically. In this example, it's planning the transplants for like a salsa garden. So the tomato calculation we did earlier is in there. There's these tomatoes that we want to plant outside in late May, and so we're starting them inside in March or like early April. And there's one of these varieties of tomatoes we're planting a little later and therefore starting a little later. And then peppers have a similar timeline. So they want to be started inside 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost, and also planted outside 2 weeks after the last frost. And an interesting thing you'll see on here is onions, right? So onions take a really, really long time to grow. I have to start them like a lot earlier for when they want to be planted outside. They need to be started like up to 10 weeks before the last frost date. But they're pretty cold hardy, so you can pretty much plant them outside as soon as the frost date passes and not worry too much about them suffering from the cold. Which is a good thing because they have taken a really long time to grow in your basement or wherever you started your seeds. The other thing that you'll see on this spreadsheet is the seeds or number of seeds or cells, and by cells, I just mean those little like spaces in, like if you have a 4-pack, there's like 4 cells in it. And that's just a calculation based on, I just doubled the number of, if you see like I wanted 25 onion plants, I just doubled that because I was like, I really want enough seeds to know that I'm going to get 25 onion plants, and so that I can put 2 seeds in each cell for those. So that's like a fun and kind of complicated way of like looking at transplant planning. Does anybody have any questions? I've just been talking for a while. Cool. And then this is a little bit more about protecting plants. So what if it gets cold again? Like I'm planning on putting some plants outside pretty soon in mid-April and planting out like lettuce and radish and spinach and cabbage and things like that. But like, what if we have another snow or another like night that goes below 30? You just want to make sure you have a way to protect your plants. In the upper right is kind of the way that like professional farmers and gardeners usually protect plants. They put metal hoops over and then put a thin polypropylene fabric called row cover over the whole thing. And that just like is enough protection to keep plants safe from frost. But there's so many other like hacks you can do. Like these people in these other photos have used like sheets and blankets and clothes to cover their plants. As long as you have something to like hold the blanket off from like squishing the plant, that's going to work fine. Or like these pop bottles, or maybe they're juice bottles, like cut in half and just like put individually over the seedlings to protect them, also works. Yeah, you can use almost any material to cover and protect your plants if it gets cold after you've planted them. This also works in the fall when you have summer crops that you have been growing and it starts to get cold, but you still want to eat them. You can also do the same thing. Like you can cover up your long season, like kale or collards, with just a little like protection if it's going to be a cold night. So with all that info that I just spewed out at you, what's like one question or like one tip for the group that you have about planning or like plant selection or anything like that? Like a favorite growing technique or something you're growing, or a question.
I have a question. So last year when I grew spaghetti squash, as you might imagine, it totally took over like my yard. I didn't have it growing vertically at all. I did try to buy those, standard wire, um, I don't know what they're called, like for tomato plants, like the pillars, but
Trellis
the
or lattice?
spaghetti, yes, thank you. The spaghetti squash was just like too heavy for that. So I was wondering for, something heavier like watermelon or that, like if you have recommendations for how it can grow more vertically, but still be supported.
Yeah, that can be really tricky because they are so heavy. And in particular with watermelon or winter squash, the plants just like, it's hard for the vines to hold the plant or the fruit when it's growing upwards. I've had good luck building things out of wood, like even just like putting, I like making a like pyramid kind of out of wood, like you put like 3 or 4 pieces together so that like each corner is down by the squash and then the top is just a peak. And then you can like wrap twine around that and it'll climb up that. And the wood is like more supportive for it because it's thicker. But I've also put in, like in a garden where I'm growing it in a row, I've put T-posts every like 4 to 5 feet, like those metal posts that you can get that are like pretty sturdy. You don't want the thin ones. You want ones that are like thicker T-posts. And then like a heavier gauge wire that you zip tie to the T-post in like a row. That has worked pretty well for me for those.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that we did about 2 or 3 years ago is we took the 8 by 4 foot section of wooden lattice. We stuck them in the ground and let them lean up against each other. And as the watermelons grew over the top of them, we stuck the flowers down through the lattices so that it had full support of the weight or full support of the weight. And when the watermelons got too large, they naturally just fell off, and it was beautiful.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you, Gary Bay. I've definitely seen that too with people using, I think it's called cattle fencing, maybe, or hog fencing, where it's like really thick, strong wire that has like squares about this big in it. And you can make like an arch out of it. And kind of, it's the same idea as what Gary was describing, where it's like the vines can grow up that and then the fruit hangs down on the inside. And then it's also easier to harvest. You can like walk down the middle and pick things. I've seen that for cucumbers more, but it seems good for squash too. And that wire is like thick enough to hold it up.
It's really thick. I did that before. I got it from like Farm and Fleet. I had the raised beds, kind of like the ones in your picture. And so I had it arched from one to the other. So it was like you were walking between them. You have to have kind of like borrow a friend's pickup truck to pick it up, but it worked really well. And it's not like, depending on how far apart your beds are, if they're too close together, it doesn't work as well. But if they're farther apart, you get a little bit of an angle to it. So it helps with the heavier stuff.
I do have a friend with a pickup truck who would love to show off the utility. So it's called cattle wire or something else.
They're like fencing panels, and you can look on the Tractor Supply type store websites and look at the different styles. So I was looking, I don't remember if I got the sheep or the cattle one, but they come with like different size holes in them. So I looked for ones that kind of had that like 4-inch by 4-inch hole. Some are bigger, some have smaller holes, and different size panels. So I just was looking around and picked one that I thought would work best for what I was growing.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I see, Linda, that your hand is up. I was just going to say you want the gauge of the wire to be big enough so that it's not just like the skinny wire that you use for like, I don't know it has to be thicker than a coat hanger, but I'll let Linda talk.
Okay, I got in late because I couldn't find my email to get on the Zoom. So anyway, but thanks for all. I'm hearing so much, and thank you so much for your presentation. I didn't know, so I was putting questions in the chat, and I didn't know.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's great. I just had a couple of them, and I forgot the second one. So anyway, if you get a chance but the first one was, can you put like it's a plexiglass that has, it has a back that's about 5-6 inches off the ground, so it would lean, it wouldn't be right on the plants. Can you put that for cover for frost or not? It would, it'd still be airflow underneath it. Is that something you could put like early, like say early times, like we start after May, but then boom, here comes the frost and they're just starting.
So you're saying like a flat plexiglass sheet?
But it's up, it's raised, it's slanted, so it's raised up. So it's raised up like 5 or 6 inches on one end, which I would probably have to, I assume, would I have to raise both ends so you have the airflow, or are we really not wanting any airflow? Because you showed examples of the bottles and you showed examples of the blanket. So
yeah, I think you could use that as long as as long as the sides are closed in, right?
okay,
Right, because if it's just covered, like if it's just over them like a slanted roof and there's no coverage on the side, the cold air can still get in and hit the plants.
okay. And it wouldn't draw cold air. The plexiglass, it wouldn't draw cold air, right? Or would it?
I don't think so. If it's just like a sheet over top of them, though, it won't have
Yeah.
the same protection, because the cold air would like go under the edges too.
Okay, good.
So like, when like you've built a cold frame before, where it's that idea where you have the box that has one end that's higher and then the plexiglass is just the roof of the box. The thing with that and with those plastic, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember what the second question was. I used to be one of the home people that would do the starters for growing hope. Do you still have those little kits that we used to get with the plant, with the plant and the dirt and everything to start seedlings for you? Do you also have any of those?
We don't have those starter kits anymore. That was a thing that we used to sell at Ypsilanti, I think, at that store that used to be downtown. So we don't have those anymore. We did give away a number of those frames, but we didn't have all the parts for them at the free sale. So yeah, we're a little low on extra growing supplies right now.
Do you have?
So these are the beds. These are the beds we got from Growing Hope just last year. They came out and set these up for us just last year. So you guys don't do that anymore?
No, we do that. That's through the home vegetable garden program. We do the raised bed kits. I think Linda was asking more about like the seed starting kits, where there's a wooden frame to like hold 2 sets of lights, and then you can put that up in your house and start your seedlings under that. But what we ended up doing with the starter kits is we actually gave a lot of the lights away at the beginning of the pandemic and didn't ask for them back. So now they're out in the community somewhere. So yeah, I think we have enough lights at the farm to start seedlings for the farm itself and for the home vegetable garden program, but we don't have any extra at the moment for kits for folks.
Are you willing to give out instructions on how to build your own?
I would love to. I have to find the instructions for that particular frame.
I would be interested in it.
Yeah, the easiest way is if you have like a little bit of extra cash and you don't have building skills, is to buy one of those little like just tiny wireframe shelves from like either Home Depot or like IKEA or something, because they're just like, they have a wire. I'm trying to describe it. It's like a see-through like wire shelving unit basically. And then it's easy to hang the lights from that and have the plants on like the lower shelf.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But I will try to find that building supply or that building.
Miss Linda, is this something like you're talking about?
Oh, no. Well, I see this is more what she's talking about.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. They used to do a one. They just had, it was just 2x4s maybe, or 2x2, and they would make a tripod, and then across from that they had you screw in the round anchoring, and then you would just with a chain, then you would put the light, fluorescent light on it. And then as you needed to, so you had the opportunity to make it lower or raise it, however it was from where you set it up at. And that was, and then of course you would get the tray with the dirt in it and the seeds to plant. Then you had a schedule of when they had to come back to Growing Hope and give them back because you were doing it for them. So you can see how long I kind of been around. I'm telling on myself, I guess.
Hey, Miss Linda, get with me after the meeting. I'll send you my contact information.
Okay.
Raised garden beds and things like that outside cold frames is something that we do at the Cooperative Orchard of Ypsilanti and Perry School.
Okay.
Yeah, great connections. Thank you. Yeah, that program was the seed starting squad, and we don't do that anymore. But I do appreciate like hearing about folks who used to grow seedlings for us. So thank you, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like Michelle has their hand raised.
Yeah, I thought of another question. So I'm trying to get some basil and rosemary started indoors, and my research is showing that they prefer warmer temperatures to germinate. If I get like LED lights, would that kick off enough heat to, to make them happy? Or like I've also heard of putting a heating pad underneath them. Would I need to do both, or would the lights be sufficient?
I don't know that you want your lights to be too hot just for yourself. I think that the lights usually are throw a little bit of heat one way or another and it's fine. I haven't had trouble starting basil and rosemary as long as the house is consistently above like mid 60s. The Growing Hope Center where we had started a lot of our seedlings is usually set around like 68, 70. And so it's pretty warm there. And so it was easier to start them. But I've also used heating pads underneath things that I thought needed more heat. And those are usually pretty easy to get also at a garden store.
Gotcha. The part of my house that gets the best like southern light is also the coldest part of my house. Like it's probably like it's my living room area. It's probably like, I don't know, 63, 65 degrees in here right now. So I was thinking like either light or heating pad, but I wasn't sure if one or the other would be better or if I should do both.
That
The
temperature
LED lights aren't going to give you enough heat. You need to go with halogen.
Halogen?
Yeah, the LEDs aren't going to give you enough heat. What we do with our cilantro when we start growing it indoors is we use a heating pad underneath the seed starting tray and keep it covered. It gets plenty of hot in there.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Gary Bay. It's also if you've ever started in a one of those just like rectangular big garden trays, you can buy a little plastic like hat basically that goes on top of it. And I think that's what you were talking about, Gary Bay, where like it insulates, it keeps some of the like warmth and moisture in so that the seedlings also stay a little warmer. But I was going to say too that like, oh yeah, showing one off for us. Perfect. Yeah. And sometimes the one that he has too, it comes with these little vents that you can open on the top so that if you need to like vent some of the moisture or air, you can do that too. But they fit right over, yeah, those big standard rectangular trays. And yeah, I don't know, 65 to me sounds like it's probably warm enough for most seeds to germinate. They just might take a little longer. That's my other option in case you're not willing to go and buy a bunch of things.
No,
Yeah.
that's good to hear because they're the only ones that I've started indoors that haven't popped up yet. And I know rosemary, the germination rate is fairly low. So I was concerned about them coming up at all, but good to hear that it might just take a little bit longer since it's a bit chillier in here. But I definitely want to make them happy. So I'll probably get a heating pad and just cover them up with saran wrap or something.
Yeah, you can also, if they don't come up forever, you can try reseeding.
Okay.
and starting again. But they are a slow growing plant because of those perennial herbs that are woody like that, like thyme and rosemary. And I'm trying to think of what other ones start really slowly. echinacea, they just start really slow and they're really tiny for a long time. So yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see. Does anybody else have any other thoughts or questions?
Hey, is bone meal considered non-organic material?
No, I think it can be organic because if it comes from organic animals, I think it's organic. I think if you were, bone meal should also be like totally sterile and safe for the garden. Like I don't think there's any problems using bone meal on plants.
We're not using it in our plants. We're putting it directly in our soil to counteract magnesium problem that we're having.
Yeah, that's a great way to use that as an amendment. You guys have really high magnesium.
Yeah, at one of our locations, our soil was deemed poisonous. There was a house that used to be there and they tore it down and left the building materials sitting there for several years before they cleared it away. So all that paint, asbestos, lead, all that good stuff just sat there and got into the soil, and then they moved it away and then we planted a garden. Hey.
Oh boy, yeah, that's a hard one. And with the lead too, you have to plant things that aren't going to suck up all the lead and then you eat it. So often people will use containers at a site like that.
Ypsilanti is also known as a heavy commercial industrial area from the past. So there's a lot of areas where it used to be like in Frog Island, for example, that used to be an actual landfill. So when they put the park and the garden down there, they laid down 5 yards of soil on top of it. And hopefully nothing would grow down through that. But, you know, the area down in River Street used to be an old industrial waste facility. Up here at the south side of Ypsilanti used to be an old water treatment plant. So there's a lot of areas in Ypsilanti that still contain a lot of contamination in the soil. And it's just, if you don't test your soil and think that you can just throw a garden anywhere, you're probably wrong.
I worry about that with where I live too in Wayne. There's industry around here. You know, it's in Metro Detroit. There's landfills close by. So soil testing is something that I want to look into sooner than later. I'm still using a lot of like just soil from the store, potting soil from the store. But as I expand my gardens and I'm thinking about like planting directly into the ground, I'm like a little nervous about that.
Yeah, it's really good to test your soil before you plant a garden. That's another thing about garden planting that I think Peyton might have talked about at the last workshop, because it was like, where is your garden going? And I would say that I think you can get a pretty basic soil test from MSU, you know, in Lansing. But we've used for our lead testing and for like heavy metal testing, we've used University of Massachusetts. And like, if you look on their website and like type in like get a soil test or something, you can find like the form you have to fill out and like how much soil to send them. And you basically just send them like a bag of soil. And then you have to like dry it out a little bit first, but then you put it in a bag, send it to them. And then they'll tell you like what's in there.
If anybody needs that information, I'll pass it along.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would love that. And you said that was the University of Massachusetts, Charlotte?
Yep, University of Massachusetts is the one we use, but there's probably a few places that do heavy metal testing. It's just like you kind of have to shop around a little bit for price.
Home Depot offers a kit that's $15.
Yeah, that's probably the cheapest one.
Well, there's the $15 one that tests for the pH levels. It's real basic. And then there's the $25 one that tests for toxins, heavy metals, other contaminants, pH, blah, blah, blah. It's $25 and it pretty much tests for everything.
And you do that all yourself?
All yourself.
Cool, thank you for that.
The Michigan State Extension Program also has the Michigan State University Extension Program has a program that offers free soil samples. And unfortunately, they also sent it to UMass.
Oh, yeah. So it's traveling a pretty long way. Well, that's good to know. The free soil testing is also nice for gardeners who are like, it's just prohibitive for me to pay, you know, $30 to $40 for a soil sample test. Yeah, I think with that, I was just gonna talk a little bit. Oops, this is not going now. Talk a little bit about, just as to end our session, cooperative growing, making a plug for this in maybe every workshop, but if you don't have the space to grow or the time to grow or the experience, sharing like your goals in garden planning and your garden space, or sharing someone else's garden space with friends and neighbors can be really awesome and can like help your whole group or your whole team to like have a better garden, or like even have enough produce to do more of the projects that you want to do. You can get, you know, more produce for your canning project, more experience and space. Like if someone has a yard but doesn't know how to grow, and like you don't have a yard, but like you can work together to do that. And it also helps you meet cool people who love to garden, which is always a bonus for most of us. And yeah, I was gonna say, if you're looking for a garden buddy, you can always drop some information in the chat and coordinate a bit that way here, or like reach out to me and see if we can find other people in the community who are also interested in that. So you can feel free to network as we wrap up. And I'm going to share, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. What was my last slide here? Oh, organizing and discussion time. And then to thank you folks for coming and remind you that the next workshop is April 2nd at the farm at 1 p.m. And we're going to be talking about starting seeds. But before we go, I'm going to stop screen sharing and instead put a couple of resources for people in the chat, which are a growing calendar for Ypsilanti, Michigan, which is a really nice resource for, I think that the old farm manager B made this one. It's a really nice resource. Oh, what
I
now?
included the link for the soil test in the chat. It's home and lawn garden information, interpreting your soil test, and soil lead testing interpretation and recommendations.
Thank you so much for that. That's really helpful.
Hey, Charlotte, it's kind of strange because all of this information that I currently have, I got from Growing Hope.
Yeah, I mean, I have the UMass stuff somewhere. I didn't actually expect to talk about it today, but it should be in some folder somewhere. I just appreciate that you're ready to pull it up right now.
Yeah, I keep all my gardening stuff right on hand.
I don't think the calendar is going to show up for us because it looks like you just dropped it from your local drive, like a link.
Oh, that's silly. Okay. Thank you for that.
No problem.
Would you also be able to put in the links that you'd showed earlier in the presentation on the slide? I think it was for applying to be in the mentor program or something like that. It was sort of I think it was a volunteer opportunity.
Yes, I can do that. I'm gonna also, before I do that, I'm gonna put in this kids gardening calendar, which is like a pretty fun, oops, sorry. Oh, good, that's not from my drive. The kids gardening calendar is just like another planner that, like, if you put in your frost date, it like has a general guide about like when to start plants inside or outside. And so that's like a fun one to use if you're just starting gardening. Let me try to get that PDF properly put in here.
If you share it to your screen, we can screenshot it.
It's kind of long. I'm just gonna try to put it in the chat. Okay. Growing cow. That one's from a Google Drive, but I think it should be shared pretty widely. And then you were asking for the home vegetable garden program information.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Oops.
Hey, Linda, you have to grant permission to access the document.
Okay, I will fix that. Just let me put this in here. So the home vegetable garden program and mentor applications are there. And then I'll try to share that document properly.
You've already shared the document. You just need to grant access. So if you open up your Google Drive or your email, you'll see that you need to grant access for individuals.
Okay.
And I just realized your title said Growing Hope Farm Manager.
Yeah.
Yay.
Thank you. We
known a
keep
lot of-
switching hats around here, so.
Yeah, I've known a lot of the farm managers over the last 10 years or so.
There's been a few. I mean, Peyton basically just left on March 11th, so he wrapped up his time, and then I'm taking over his spot, and we hired a new garden manager. So